Hello, I want to talk to you today about assignment 7.2, problems 7 and 8. You're asked to solve an equation by factoring. Before we get into that, though, I would like to talk about the zero product property. If you have two numbers, and I'm just calling them A and B, they're just any two numbers, and their product is 0, what do you know about at least one of these numbers? What you would know is at least one of them would be 0. The only way you can have a product of two numbers is if at least one of them are 0, or both could be 0. This is a very important property to use when you're solving equations by factoring. So if we come over this equation, we want to solve by factoring. You want to always have 0 on one side and everything else on the other. And then you want to factor this trinomial. Hopefully that's something you've been studying, and so you want to factor it into the product of two binomials. What we're doing is reversing something called the full method. Okay, the product of the first terms, which where the f comes from, has to be x squared, and so the first terms would have to be x and x. The product of the last terms needs to be a negative 2. So we need a product of negative 2. Well, there's not too many choices there. We could have 1 and negative 2, or negative 1 and positive 2. But we need a sum. That's the last terms, but the inner and outer, the sum must be a positive 1. And so the negative 1 and 2, if you add, that would give you a positive 1. So you could check that this is factored correctly by fulling. The product of the first terms would be x squared. Product of the last terms would be negative 2. And then the inner would be negative 1 plus negative 1x plus 2x, which would give us this x. Okay, so first step is to factor the trinomial. The next step is to use the zero product property. We have the product two factors equal to 0. Well, the zero product property says that either the first factor equals 0 or the second factor equals 0. So we're taking a quadratic equation and breaking it into two linear equations. And here we just add 1 to each side. And so I have x equal 1. Here we subtract 2 from each side. And we have x equal negative 2. So that's the solutions of this equation. If we go on to look at number 8, we want to solve a quadratic equation. We want to use the method of solve by factoring. We're going to use zero product property once again. Okay, we have 0 on one side, which is real important. We want to factor this trinomial into the product of two binomials. The product of the first part has to be x squared. So that will give you an x and an x. The product of the last terms must be negative 40. Well, there's several choices for numbers whose product would be negative 40. You could have 1 and negative 40. You could have 2 and negative 20. You could have 4 and negative 40. 5 and negative 8. Then you could swap the signs, could be negative 1 and positive 40, negative 2 and positive 20, negative 4 and positive 10, negative 5 and positive 8. There's a lot of products that give us negative 40. We need the one that gives us a sum of negative 3. Well, that would be 5 and negative 8. So it would be plus 5 and minus 8. So now we've taken this trinomial, factored it into the product of two binomials. Using the zero product property, we can set each factor equal to 0. So again, we're taking a quadratic equation, breaking it into two linear equations. Here I subtract 5 from each side. I have one solution, x equals negative 5. Here I add 8 to each side. And we have x equal 8. Now you can always check your answers when you're solving a quadratic equation. If you take your answers and you go back to the original equation, if you plug them in, you should get a true statement, or you should get 0. So if I took, for example, 8 and put it in this equation, I would have 8 squared minus 3 times 8 minus 40 should be 0. Let's see, 8 squared, that's 64, minus 24 minus 40 equals 0. So that one checked. You could check the others as well, and that will also work. Hope this helps.